as a Christian. What does it say no?
Well, there's where we get into the specifics of other passages, right? You let your light shine before men.
God, good friends, and halfway through, that very has very small jump. Keep the association every year.
People do that, right, James? No. You see, I try to tell us, understand why we're here. Kind of ties into my sermon this morning. You know, why we're here is we're trying to reach the lost. Can you love anybody into heaven? Can you love anybody into heaven? What do they need? They need this. Bottom line, they need the gospel. You can be the nicest person in the world. You can cut your neighbor's lawn. I'll use the illustration last week. You can cut your neighbor's lawn for 35 years. Does that get them to heaven? What do they need? They need the gospel. That's the point. And of course, that doesn't quite fit here, but I know the point that Gene's making here because he's talking about this idea of, you know, if you come up from among them, and I haven't brought it up in this section yet, but if you come up from among them, what do you say to a brother who's at Corinth and says, Paul, if I do that, how am I going to help them get to heaven? What's your response? Come up from among them. Be separate. That you won't go along with it. You'll mark. You'll just, you know, they know where you stand. How does that help them, Amy? That's the whole point. You know, when you take a stand against something, it's a tool to teach. Don't always look at it as the negative. You know, the person like, you know, I noticed that, you know, you don't do the stuff that we do at work. You know, we say, let's all go to the bar every night, and you go home to your family. They might come around and say, you know, yeah, majority of them might say, I don't talk to so-and-so over there. You know, he thinks he's better than the rest of us. But somebody might come up and just talk about, you know, why do you do that? Thank you. You know, and you use that as a tool. Our stand against error, folks, is not just to isolate ourselves. Man, if we want to do that, if we want to isolate ourselves, why don't we just pull a Jimmy Jones, right? What did they do? What did they do in the beginning? Let's just buy a chunk of land. We'll get a commune, right? We'll grow our own food. We'll cut ourselves off from the rest of the world because I don't want to be influenced by that world. Well, didn't he say come up from among them and be separate? Isn't that what he's talking about here? No. Let's be careful about that. That's why context is everything, and that's why the situation that Dean brought up. TJ?
But he knows where that line is. He knows that I don't do a lot of the things that he does. You know, I know that he doesn't do things that I do. Right. I also use it as a tool. I don't, every time we have a conversation, I think, but every time I see a open, you know, he'll call me sometimes for a talk. Right. And I try to use those times as an opportunity to talk to them. But I don't know if that has to be a conversation.
And to bring us back to our context, okay, if you're at Corinth, and these guys that have turned the church against Paul, okay, these false teachers, that guy better not be your best friend. You understand? In the context, he's talking, you come up from among them. These guys are evil. These guys need to be marked. These guys are creating division within the church. These guys are evil. And you need to understand the dangers of that and come up from among them because they will influence you. We've always said that. Who's influencing who? Say, well, are they influencing me or am I influencing them? And that's where the power comes into this as far as taking a stand for what is right. Please, guys, you guys sometimes bring up scenarios that I think they're valid and they need to be looked at. But in the context here, we're talking about people that came in amongst the church at Corinth and are turning them against Paul. And of course, turning them against Paul simply meant doing things that were wrong. Believing things that were wrong. Doing things that were wrong. And you cannot tolerate that, I don't care who it is.
My personal feeling is that with the experience that I have, that's encouraged me and made me a stronger Christian. Now, if we do it for you, like you said, then we're all there and we know what to know, and we're not getting gifted like challenged like we would in the world. But we can't leave the world. We're going to live in the world.
That's it. That's it.
But we learn by the temptations, we learn by, if I be in a conversation with this neighbor, I talk to the neighbor, and nothing wrong with me, reminded. Well, I've been living here 42 years. The neighbor decided to be open. Should I come down here and bang you up? So we learn by experiences. We become stronger.
We do. Now remember, guys, I just described a situation where we'll all be together. That's heaven. Okay, that's heaven. I mean, I long to be there, right? There's no more sin, right? No more torture, no more death, no more sorrow. But while we're getting there, we're trying to get there. And we're trying to help as many people as we can get there. Our context, don't let them prevent us from getting there. That's the whole point. Don't allow others to prevent you from getting to heaven. Well, they're just doing but Paul's like saying, they're influencing you, you're believing what they're teaching you, and it's wrong. Take a stand. But it's hard. Why? You guys already answered the question, but I really want to bring it down to a local congregation. Why is it hard to stand against them? You guys already mentioned you might lose some friends out of it. You might be labeled as a troublemaker, right? And I think of another reason, and I want you to be thinking of some others, and I think of another reason why a person might not do it is because they'd be of the minority. If I it'd be okay if we had this problem here and I had 75% of the congregation behind me on this. But it's just hard when you're part of the few, Matt.
I think you also have to be careful not to look at wrong what we're doing wrong, we're not associated with people. What I mean by that is I mean a person that he thrives off of making people happy. He basically judged his way of I'm going to heaven because I managed to make this person mad, I managed to make this congregation mad, and he didn't go in meet with these people with the right intent or talk to these people, but he goes out with his mom, have discussions, it was I'm the national competitive, so they either do it or they hate my guts, and then they start telling other people why they hate me. And so I think we also have to be careful not to with what attitude we're approaching people, because that's a quick way to shut people out. And just like you may gain a reputation for, well, either he's not going to go drinking with us, he's not going to come to our pool party. You have to be careful not to gain a reputation. So we can gain the same reputation with this guy, hateful, mean, and you can be so good.
And sometimes people assume that anyway, even though it's wrong, right? Even though that's wrong. But yeah, obviously, in this context here, guys, and that's why the context is so important, we don't do anything out of hatred for people. We don't hate anybody. Okay? We hate every false way. Right? We hate sin. That should come across in what Paul's talking about here. But yeah, in its context, do we speak the truth in love? Absolutely, we need to be doing that. We need to be mindful of others. We don't want to shut the door where they'll never want to talk to me ever again, but sometimes that happens. Sometimes you try to reach people, Josh. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. No, it's the same. What we're talking about here is that the situation is, our study last Sunday morning is that there is no fellowship on a spiritual level with the unbeliever, okay? But yet we're to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, right? And are those creatures, the people that I'm going to go preach the gospel to, am I in fellowship with them? No, I'm not in fellowship with them. Okay, even on a spiritual level. That's the point that we're trying to get across here. Now, I don't want to create a door, but now, if they're wanting to encourage me to do things that are wrong, no. Now we get over to the second John. 2 John, we always quote verse 9. You got to read verse 10 and 11. Because 2 John 9, if you don't abide in the doctrine of Christ, you don't have God. But the next verse one talks about that if somebody brings this false doctrine in, don't greet him or you become partakers of his evil deeds. And so you don't want to be a compromiser by not standing for what is right, okay? And so I don't do the things that others might do, but you know what? The circumstances around it, that is not what we're dealing with here, God. This situation at Corinth was trying to fellowship. When I go visit my mom, who's not a Christian, I'm not going there to fellowship her. See, on a spiritual level. Okay, on a spiritual level, get that. Now, when I go visit my mom, what do you think? Which was last week, yeah. We had to do Webster's definition and we had to do ours. You know, so we'd better off to do, yeah, maybe we just use a different word, right? Yeah, because that's society that we live in, because we throw that word out there and they're automatically thinking of Webster, and then think, well, I guess, Chuck, you don't talk with anybody and don't do anything with anybody that's not a Christian. I didn't say that. Well, we kind of look foolish because we don't understand our words, right? And that's where the confusion comes into play, Josh. And that's the whole point. I'm not in fellowship with the, unfruitful works of darkness, okay? So I'm not even going to engage in what they do. But you know what? I'm going to be around them. What? Because I'm going to go into all the world and preach the gospel. I'm going to let my light shine. I'm going to be an influence for good. And times when I say no can actually be a door opening to try to help them, okay? Nancy?
It's kind of like, even when you go do things, you play your iPod, or you go do things with your friends. But if it turns around that, okay, well, we're going to go drinking, that's when you shut the door and say, no, I can't do that. That is not, that I can't believe it, and I can't do that. And that can kind of help open, or just, why not?
Which a lot of us here have opened doors that way, by the way, with the people that we're around, Pete.
This scenario, let's say, I know when I was younger, I was talking to someone about my belief. Studying with a lot of times, it's a lot of religion. But watching the service meeting in my church, and not go to service in your church. Let's say we go to that service and we're sitting there, quietly and just listening to what's going on. We have to experience that we're intelligent with.
Right. Right. I agree.
That would make that scenario. Unless we're saying, hey, that's wrong.
You see, and the situation is, and that's where I didn't realize this short discussion turned into such a 3-week, month-long study. But you know what? These are everyday things that you and I have to work through these things. That's what makes us a stronger congregation, by getting down to the nuts and bolts of things. And that's a good thing. I'm glad you guys are thinking about this stuff, because it makes for good Bible study. And so in a situation like that is when, have I ever gone to a denominational meeting? One of their revivals? What was your purpose? Try teaching, which I did. Afterwards, I didn't interrupt services. And, whoa, preacher, be a troublemaker that way, shut more doors that cart me off. Yeah, I go there, but I'm not going to go somewhere and give the appearance that I am, like you're talking about, Keith, give the appearance that I endorse it. And I don't want to open up I'm going to say something, and I'm going to shut this discussion down. I'm going to shut it down as soon as it comes out of my mouth. But it's kind of like, I'm not going to go if my cousin Bill is invited me to his marriage when he's going to marry Fred. Not going. Because my presence endorses it. Okay? That's what I'm saying. Okay? I'll shut it down. I'm going to be true to my word. Now look at the verse. It doesn't end the discussion, because the first verse of chapter 7 kind of does that. And then I'll get you guys to read in this next section here in chapter 7. But look what he does in chapter 7, verse 1. Therefore, because after talking about all those things, and please keep in context there, what the Corinthian brethren were facing. Therefore, having these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. Wow, I love that, because I'm going to tell you this much. Those false teachers amongst those brethren were causing them to have this, the opposite of this. if they didn't stand against it. You know, the brethren at Corinth need to understand, you don't do anything about this, I'm going to tell you, you're basically caught up in the filthiness of the flesh and of the spirit, and there's no perfectingness of holiness with God. Really? It's that bad? Yes, it's that bad. If you don't mark, if you don't come out from among, if you're not separate from among them, don't identify with them. You say, well, that's going to come across like I think I'm better than everybody else. This is the standard. We're just doing what we're told. You guys at the job, you can be right beside the same guy. I'm going to use an assembly line example. You guys work for the same boss. One wants to do exactly what he's told. This one wants to slack off from time to time. This one that's slacking says, man, you're just making me look bad. You think you're better than me. I'm just doing what the boss said. You think you're better than me. I'm just doing. He said, we're just doing what our God tells us to do. You think you're better. I'm just doing what God tells me to do. You're going to have people that will look down on you when you're just doing your job, so to speak.
I had that they didn't have buzzers for breaks and all. You just watch the clock and you did. So I watched the clock and I went back to work and I was supposed to. One of the guys said, well, you're making a foot bath by being on time all the time. I said, no, only you can do that.
They're making themselves look bad. Does he? Okay. That's another hand. It's kind of a misnomer when people say, you know, when they talk about people who do things that are wrong, and they say, but they're good people. You know, from a biblical standpoint, you're either walking in the light or you're not. You know, and I know there are people out there that are good in the sense that we all look. I just don't think there was. The only reason I'm hesitating on this, Dave, is because you asked such a large question. You can't answer that in a paragraph. Okay, you can't answer. There are some people out there that are very bad. They are evil. They do bad things to children. I mean, they couldn't care less. They have no conscience. No conscience. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm justifying this person over here who's my neighbor that goes to a religious group and they're very moral and they're zealous for their group and they're clean cut and they do nice things, you know. Are they a bad people? Are they bad? Well, they do bad stuff if they're not in harmony with the word, right? I mean, I'm not going to say they're not. Tina?
Well, Hilton had that same question. And I told her, I said, well, God didn't make you that. You choose to be that. So that individual itself is not bad. It's just they chose in their hearts not to do what's right.
Guys, bottom line. Let me answer Dave's question that way. Sin is bad. Okay, now you answer it in whatever context you want, you know, with whatever neighbor, you know, sin is bad. Sin is never good. Yeah.
I think I got a mental issue. I can say you really know they're bad. I don't think you need to tell them they're bad.
Well, but the people that just have their conscience seared with a hot iron, I mean, they just think they're okay, right? And there's some people out there that I've met in the religious realm that are just, I got to tell you, folks, you talk about being an example. I mean, they're just really, really good people from that standpoint. But are they really good if they're not respecting the authority of God? That's like some of these false teachers. I mean, I don't know, these people at Corinth, were they family members? You know, did they do things for some of these other members? You can try to justify not coming up from among them and being separate by looking at that. You have to be extremely cautious in trying to compliment people that are not walking in the light. That's all I'm saying. Matt? Sure.
You would look at, then you look at, you know, celebrities that maybe unmarried with kids, but they're married, they make their money, they do their time carry. The world would look at that and say, that's a good person. And we might even look at that and say, that's a good person from a human standpoint. You kind of have to, like you're saying, you kind of have to specify what kind of good we're talking about. We're talking about they don't steal, they don't murder, they don't do this stuff.
That's usually what it is, Matt.
Yeah.
And the bottom line for all of us here is that I have constantly preached from this pulpit over and over again that our government is more concerned about counterfeit money that looks almost like the original as opposed to monopoly money. They don't worry about you walking in with a $500 monopoly money into the store. You're not going to fool anybody. And I always caution this congregation, you know what? If we look almost like the original church, what the Lord wants, if it's almost, it's not good. So that's why we got to keep our guard up. And when Matt talks about that guy, when somebody talks about good, well, what do you mean good? You know, and so.
Well, I mean, a couple of things that come in my mind. Jesus wants to make a statement that there's none good except for God. So, with that in mind, we have the account Matthew. What did Jesus want to say? Talk to me.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. He called it that.
You're either in the light or you're not. Because if you're not, you know, I understand. There are people in the world that I view as good people, but it just depends on which prism you look at them through. If you look at them through the prism that God has given us in His Word, then you have your answer. It's good. It's good.
We got to be careful of man's standards as opposed to God's standards. And that's really what we're trying to drive home here, guys. What are the standards of God? And it continues on. You want to see Paul open up his heart? I told you this is what we were going to get into. Mark, let's start with you. 2 verses apiece. Go 2 through 12 here, guys. 2 verses apiece. Look what we have here in chapter 7.
Therefore, having these promises, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, and perfecting holiness of the fear of God. Open your hearts to us. We have long no longer of corrupted fear of God. People who do, I said before that we are in human heart, God, together in the together. Great is my confidence in you. Great is my hope for you. I am so much comfort. And most surely the glory of God.
Verse 7.
Well, before this say the same thing that we saw Isaiah God from secondly, that Romans in you, they want to clear yourself, that you want to get nation, they fear you, what to do, desire, they want to feel, you, what to do, and all things. You will improve yourself to clear this nation. Wherefore, though, I wrote to you, and it is not for his power that has done me wrong, nor for his power that suffered wrong, but that I care for you inside out, not killing you.
All right. Wow. Lots in here. We're not going to finish all of this today. But you do see, guys, once again, Paul's affection towards the brethren there. And I do think that does play a role. You guys bring up about your neighbors and your friends and whatnot. In this context, he's talking about his own brethren in the Lord. But if you're going to help people, I hope they see that you really do care for them. I mean, I really see Paul pouring out his heart for these brethren here. Couldn't wait to hear the news. He wrote that first letter. Man, you ever write a letter to somebody and you're waiting back to hear how they respond? And I've even done that recently. You just don't know. I mean, I hope they receive it with the spirit that it was intended. But sometimes people read things into it and they come back and I go, oh no, they understood my motives were all wrong on that one. and then you have to come back and apologize and all that. And you see where Paul here was concerned with how the brethren were going to react to what he wrote them in his first epistle. But then he says in verse 2, open your hearts to us. We have wronged no one. We have corrupted no one. We have cheated no one. Why would Paul say that? Come on, we've been talking about it for weeks. Keith? You know, as soon as somebody comes in here and says, Chuck, I didn't do it. Didn't do what? I'm going to think somebody said he did something. Or maybe just guilty. Nobody knows, but you know, but usually when somebody says, but you know, I just want you to know for the record, I didn't do it. Why are you telling me that? Because somebody said I did it. You know, and you have to see, here's Paul. You can imagine being accused of something like this. We opened up, you know, he says, open up your heart to us. Please be understanding. We wronged no one. We didn't. He said, we corrupted no one. We cheated no one. Well, I tell you, when you put yourself there out as a teacher, you can be vulnerable, can't you? What could people accuse me of? Or even if they came in here and never met me before, sat in the pulpit, what kind of evil thing could they say about me because I'm in the pulpit? What kind of evil thing might they say? Just to spread. Look at him up there. He thinks he's better than everybody. Why else? What else could they say about me because I'm a preacher? That's it. That guy's up there. I'm going to tell you. You follow his life out this place. He's the biggest hypocrite that ever lived. Right? Nobody just gets up there and does that for nothing. You know, it's all about the paycheck with him. Yeah, people can say that kind of stuff. It hurt. You think it hurt Paul? I think it came across in the last chapter. You know, and Paul has to defend himself. Now, I know he's writing by inspiration. Don't get me wrong here. But even though that these are inspired by God, his feelings are real here. When he meant what he said later on. We're not going to get there today. He meant what he said there when he said, you know, I didn't write this. You know, I didn't want that kind of result, but I'm kind of good that because of that feeling that it produced this result. You know, I didn't write these things to make you feel that way, but I know you feeling that way produced repentance, and that's a good thing. And you have to appreciate Paul with his openness. And we saw it in the last chapter. It's almost like, because I read it. Remember when I read just a few moments ago when he said in verse 12 of chapter 6, you are not restricted by us, but you are restricted by your own affection. And in this chapter, it's almost like Paul says, you know, open up your heart because, man, we have opened up our hearts to you. We have been honest. We have been open with you. And I'll tell you, brother, if you're like that with each other, if we're like that with each other, that will strengthen. That's what Paul wanted. He wanted that bond between them to be strengthened, that they could have that confidence in one another. Mark?
Don't worry. People in the city, you just preach what you need to preach. Understanding, knowing that God is going to be with you, and you give all these people bad things about it.
Well, and especially when he labeled, you go back to Acts 18 and 8. When that congregation started, I'm telling you folks, that builds up a special bond, I'll tell you. When you go into a place and people are responding to the gospel, you care for them like a father and a son relationship. And Paul cared deeply for them. Yes, he wanted them to go to heaven. That, you know, their relationship with him, does that really matter? It did matter in the sense where it could cause them to miss heaven. Debbie. And I appreciate that, Mark. And so he says in verse 3, I do not say this to condemn. I don't say this to condemn, for I have said before that you are in our hearts to die together and to live together. Oh yeah, Paul, have you ever heard of somebody just saying, yeah, you're just trying to butter me up? You know, somebody comes up and starts complimenting you left and right and say, yeah, what do you want? I'm telling you, Paul is not just writing fluff here. It's not fluff. He means it. he actually loved these brethren greatly, wanted them to be faithful to the Lord. And that's the primary thing within all of this. Do you think Paul's more interested in them having a good relationship rather than them being in a relationship with God that's proper? I hope that doesn't come across. I hope Paul doesn't come across like, your friendship means more to me than my relationship with God. No. And I want you to be closer to me than you are to the Lord. No. You're not seeing that at all. But he is talking about this idea that, you know what, when I was with you and I was honest with you, and he brings that up again when we get into the 11th chapter and the 12th chapter. So I'm not saying this to condemn. Look at verse 4. Great is my boldness of speech toward you. Great is my boasting on your behalf. I am filled with comfort. I am exceedingly joyful in all your tribulation. The struggles with going verse by verse, guys, if you haven't read the whole book, is you don't see where Paul is doing some groundwork. Because Paul talks about his speech here, because a few chapters later, he's going to be talking about those people that accused him of his speech. Oh, yeah, he says such things when he's not here. You know, that's so typical of Paul. I don't know who these guys are, but I don't like them. I mean, I just don't like what they're doing. I want them to go to heaven. It's too late now, whatever their case is. But I just don't like the way they're treating Paul here. I mean, it's just horrible. And we're going to examine that a little bit more. But folks, to really get the context, read a couple of chapters ahead. Get an idea of what Paul's dealing with here, and I'm sure it'll just come alive even more so. Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it.